Thank you for joining me for this brief, maybe not as brief as some would like, but brief ceremony of welcome. You know, we're not a university, and we don't have commencements, we don't have graduations. In fact, for an institution that's approaching its second century, we have remarkably few ceremonies or rituals, and those that we do have are all organized around food, as is this one, actually. The best part is still to come. Still, many societies do use rituals to mark liminal moments, moments of what the anthropologist Victor Turner called betwixt and between, moments at the threshold. Victor Turner was a member here, 1975 to 1976. I'm going to do my best to only cite people who have been members or faculty of the Institute. Sometimes I will mention like Immanuel Kant. I can't always limit myself just to that. But he was very much a specialist of rituals of betwixt and between. And so it seems appropriate to honor with such a ceremony our collective entrance into a new year and a new and extraordinary community. Now, I know that on occasions like this, some significant philosophy has been uttered. John Dewey, The Aims of Education, that was a commencement address at the University of Chicago. Giambattista Vico offered 6 inaugural lectures at the University of Naples from 1699 to 1707. But I'm not going to mention them because so far as I know, they weren't members or faculty of the Institute. And besides, I don't really pretend to offer any significant philosophy as they did. I simply want to describe what it is that we are celebrating. And what is that? Well, I think every one of you will have a different answer to that question. But from my point of view, we're celebrating our entry, or for some lucky people, our return to a very peculiar space and temporality, a space of thought and a time of mind. We're entering a place whose space-time, see, I have learned from the physicists here, whose space-time is different from that of the normal world you come from, in that it is entirely dedicated to the possibilities of thought and of discovery, and specifically to the possibilities of your thought and your discovery. It's easy enough to sense the distinctiveness of that space. We sense it in the absence of teaching and committee obligations, of sports teams, of economic missions or political statements, indeed of any of the many purposes to which colleges and universities are dedicated, other than the single purpose of supporting you in your exploration of whatever question it is that you wish to explore. We sense it in the fact that our residences, our offices, our dining halls, our common room, our schools, centers, and convening spaces are all designed to hold us together in a community capable of generating both solitude and encounter, and of insulating us from the demands of the outside world. We sense it also in the roughly 600 acres of forest, field, and meadow that replace the purposeful lines and the angularities of the everyday world of utility and action with a kind of fractal leafiness, appropriate and winding paths, appropriate for peripatetic cogitation. I've tried to get as many $5 words as I could in one sentence. That invitation is deliberate. The early Institute faculty formed a committee called the Committee on the Woods that laid out and blazed those trails that they wanted to walk for their peripatetic cogitation. If you ask Caitlin Rizzo, our archivist, she can show you a photo of Paul Dirac, the physicist, with an axe on his shoulder, heading off to blaze those trails. The darkness of the night sky, the boldness of the deer, yes, the deer are very bold here, the presence of fireflies and foxes, of bluebirds and orioles, even the circling turkey vultures, which always incite a certain memento mori in me, and the occasional bald eagle, they all help us feel that the space of the Institute is not quite that of the world we came from and to which many of us will return. This peace and this freedom should not be confused with purposelessness. Our distinctive space is in the service of a distinctive temporality, a time of mind. The passage of time may be the most familiar and implacable given of our finite being. But here at the Institute, no, it's not that we're immortal at the Institute, but we seek to make time at least temporarily unfamiliar. We're here to bend time, like a great pianist bends the tempos of a Bach saraband, to bend it away from the short-term horizons of the everyday world, and in so doing, to create possibilities for the kind of exploration and the kind of discovery that is only possible when we are capable of stilling the rumbling of being long enough to attend to a question that leads beyond the immediate horizons of the known. So the Institute exists with this one goal, to offer you, its inhabitants, the opportunity to occupy that time of mind in a community capable of nourishing knowledge at its most difficult. Nietzsche, the philosopher, again, I'm sorry, not a member, once, although imagine the lunchtime conversations. He once complained that what most of the world wants when it asks for knowledge is, quote, that something strange should be reduced to something familiar. And he called this the error of errors. The greater discovery lies in becoming aware of our most basic assumptions so that we can question them and make them strange. You're entering a community that exists to offer you the conditions of possibility for that estrangement. This has been the goal of the Institute since its founding, to assemble a group of thinkers capable of producing, through their talent, their proximity, their collaboration, conversation, diversity, and toleration of difference, insights and discoveries that could not otherwise have been produced. Their commitment has never been to the creation of an ideological or disciplinary consensus, but to something quite different, to the constant testing of ideas for the unfamiliar to emerge from the known. We who are assembled here, or you who are assembled here, constitute the community of thinkers for this coming year, waiting to be surprised by the directions in which your own thoughts and dialogues might take you. I'm going to say us, because I'm part of the community too. The Institute rightly prides itself on the fields that have emerged from those dialogues, often enough between disciplines. To take one early and famous example, the economist Oskar Morgenstern and John von Neumann met not over tea at the Institute, because alcohol wasn't served at tea, but over drinks at the Nassau Club down the street. Now, fortunately, the Rubenstein Commons can now serve the purpose that Morgenstern and von Neumann were desperate for. That encounter led to their joint authorship of The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. Their stated goal in that book was to create a new science of the psyche, to find laws, like the laws of physics, that could predict human behavior, and to provide axioms for human desire, they called them preferences, as logically consistent as those of set theory. The result was the field of game theory, today used to think about all sorts of problems, from the possibilities of nuclear war to the matching of friends and partners on Facebook and Tinder, from the dynamic pricing models that govern more and more of our economies to the security algorithms that protect and guarantee ever larger parts of those economies. Now, as I think about the consequences of von Neumann and Morgenstern's conversations for the world we live in today, I find myself wanting to urge you to be as promiscuous and exogamous as possible in your own dialogues, to reach out beyond your own intellectual kith and kin. That's not easy to do, even here at the Institute. Karen Uhlenbeck, whom you may know as a long-term distinguished visiting professor here, wrote in her report on the special year in geometric partial differential equations, 1997 to 1998, and note, members file a report of their experience at the end of the year, and that report sits in our archives waiting to be picked up by a director yearning to embarrass you in front of some future audience. That moment is now. She wrote, "While I always hoped for some mixing, the physicists ate at one table and the math people at another. I have no clear idea of how to influence this kind of intermingling, either between the math community and outside influences, or within the math community itself, end quote. It's not easy, but it is possible. A member of mathematics from last year's cohort divided his report into 3 parts: collaboration with mathematicians, collaboration with physicists, and collaboration with social scientists. In this 3rd section, he wrote, and I quote, "I learned immensely from the social science seminar and my interactions with scholars whose research interests intersect with mine. Although it's harder to measure their impact in terms of publications at the moment, these seminars, conversations, and intellectual relationships will shape my scholarship on mathematics and society moving forward." Our community is intimate, and one of the gifts of that intimacy is that it is possible to switch tables, so to speak. I urge you to take advantage of that intimacy and to cultivate those conversations and encounters that have the capacity not only to confirm, but also to transform our assumptions and hence our worlds. I'm going to offer just one example. What if, instead of stumbling upon the mathematically inclined Vienna Circle economist Morgenstern, von Neumann had chanced instead upon his colleagues and fellow refugees, the art historian Erwin Panofsky and the medieval historian Ernst Kantorowicz, as they chatted under the Institute's dark sky one February night. I don't know if it was clouded or starry. I don't know the exact day in February of 1952, so I can't tell you. After an evening at the movies. I don't even know what movie they went to see. Maybe Rashomon. Kantorowicz pronounces, it must have been starry, because Kantorowicz pronounces, "Looking at the stars, I feel my own futility." Panofsky replies, "All I feel is the futility of the stars." Now, it may not be obvious, but these two were debating the same point that Morgenstern and von Neumann had taken on, though from a different point of view. Immanuel Kant, not a member, had made a famous analogy between the laws that govern galaxies, so physics, and those that govern humanity, so the psyche. "Two things," he wrote, "fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe: the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me." Kantorowicz was invoking this parallel between the laws of physics and psychology. But Panofsky's witty quip was a rebuttal of that position, a reproach to those, like his colleague von Neumann, whom he knew quite well, who thought that the inner life of human beings can be reduced to laws like those of physics that have helped us make so much sense of the cosmos. I want to imagine what a conversation between von Neumann and Panofsky could have looked like. Why? Well, for a quick answer, I'll turn to an essay von Neumann published in Fortune magazine in 1955 called "Can We Survive Technology?" In it, he predicted that changes in weaponry, communications, and climate meant that the world needed new political forms and ideals if it wished to avoid, quote, "forms of climactic warfare as yet unimagined." The only recipe for surviving technological change, he concluded, was relying on human qualities. But what are those qualities? What's human about them? And how can they help us achieve new ideals and forms of life adequate to the future? Such questions, I think you'll agree, are just as important today as they were in von Neumann and Panofsky's times. To answer those questions, or rather simply to ask them in a way appropriate to their difficulty, we need the humanist and the physicist, the social scientist and the mathematician, indeed everyone in this community here at the Institute, to be in dialogue under our starry sky. And the night sky here, if you haven't experienced it, is indeed extraordinary. This was in fact the vision of Robert Oppenheimer, the Institute's longest-serving director. If you've seen the movie, you know that Oppenheimer, like von Neumann, was consumed with the consequences for humanity or scientific progress. By the way, if you haven't seen the movie, you probably shouldn't be here. No, just kidding. But it's something of a rite of passage for people who have anything to do with the Institute. He was consumed with the consequences for humanity of scientific progress, especially progress in the physics of the atom, whose powers he had done so much to unleash. And he championed such progress. For example, he supported von Neumann's work on the programmable computer, but he also thought that this approach was not enough. He believed that, quote, the safety of a nation or the world cannot lie wholly or even primarily in its scientific or technical prowess, end quote. It needs to pay attention not only to mathematics, physics, and technology, but also to ethics, religions, values, forms of political and social organization, feelings, emotions. Oppenheimer thought that the challenges of the future could only be met by bringing the technological and the human together. And he sought to make the Institute a place where these many forms of thought and aspects of humanity could come into contact and conversation. And the list of people he brought here is really quite extraordinary, including like the young Chomsky and T.S. Eliot and Piaget and many, many more, in fields that we have never necessarily had permanent faculty in. Such conversations are never easy. They weren't easy in the early years of the Institute, which was a time of economic collapse, sharp discrimination, technological transformation. Think of the introduction of radio and cinema, increasing nationalism, displaced peoples, and the rising flames of war, a time in which the world of ideas, of universities, and of research was becoming a battleground. And they aren't easy today. In a world of technological change, the reemergence of borders and other barriers to the exchange of peoples and ideas, a rekindling of nationalism, war, and mass migration, and renewed conflict over the nature of universities, research, and ideas. Sounds kind of parallel. All of these forces threaten to intrude into what the Institute's founding director, Abraham Flexner, called this paradise for scholars, the Institute. The Institute is not a paradise. It is very much of this earth, dedicated to its study and subject to its vicissitudes. But the Institute is a locus amoenus, that is a special place, special in its space, in its temporality, and in its constant commitment to the values of engagement with and debate over ideas. You yourselves come from many places, some 40 countries this year. This was by design and is at the foundation of our ideals. In its founding document of 1930, the Institute committed itself to remaining open to people of all religions, genders, races, and nationalities, a commitment rare in the 1930s and just as critically and important and difficult to uphold today as it was then. Oppenheimer, for example, moved heaven and earth to bring emerging Chinese scholars to the Institute in the 1940s. For example, the mathematician S.S. Chern and the physicists Yang and Li, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics for their work here at the Institute, the first Chinese to win a Nobel Prize in Physics. I'm not sure if today, even someone as well connected as Oppenheimer could arrange a visa for such scholars. This is just one example of what I mean when I say that the Institute is of this world and subject to its vicissitudes. But wherever in the world you come from, and however much the world may change around us, I trust you will agree that this locus amoenus, this special temporality or time of mind, and this constant commitment to the testing of ideas are precious. You may even feel that such values are under threat, even in those spaces, such as universities, that claim to be built upon them, and perhaps even in the places you have each come from. All the more reason to celebrate that today you are entering a space that is as dedicated to the freedom and the possibilities of thought as any place can be. Like paradise, which didn't last very long, we're told, such spaces are fragile. But I do not fear for the Institute, even in these uncertain times, so long as we cultivate our sole reason for existence, to provide the most promising talent from all over the globe the possibility to actualize its potential for advanced study, and so long as we remain committed to the possibilities of dialogue across very different convictions and commitments in our community. I urge you to pursue such dialogue in any direction you wish, again, even if it means switching tables in the dining hall. You'll encounter very different voices among our faculty and members, invited visitors and speakers, supporters of the Institute, as well as critics of our work. That diversity of voices is the necessary foundation for debate, for diagnosis in the Greek sense of the word, for discovery. But equally necessary is the awareness that none of these many voices speaks for the Institute. Conversely, just as none of the inhabitants speak for the Institute will not claim to speak for you, since it cannot articulate a collective position without putting at risk the full freedom of dissent that every one of you must feel for your own possibilities of thought to thrive. These must be the enduring commitments of an institution founded to serve not as a platform, but as a community dedicated to the work of inquiry at its most profound. That work has not changed as much as one might think since the early days, and Oppenheimer's words about our purpose remain as true today as they were when he spoke them in a radio lecture in 1953. This open access to knowledge, these unlocked doors and signs of welcome are a mark of freedom as fundamental as any. They give a freedom to resolve differences by converse, and where converse does not unite, to let tolerance compose diversity. The unrestricted access to knowledge, the unplanned and uninhibited association of people for its furtherance, these are what may make a vast, complex, ever-growing, ever-changing, ever more specialized and expert technological world, nevertheless, a world of human community. I see a welcome is becoming a sermon, and I'm becoming a little emotional, so I will conclude with an appropriate blessing. May every instant of your coming year in this space of human community dedicated solely to the exploration of ideas at their most difficult bring you a renewed sense of the possibilities for your own thought and your own discovery. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the Institute, and I invite you to a great party outside.